Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Strife's Sanctum podcast. My name is Citizen Strife, and this week I delve into a franchise I'm glad to have gotten a third sequel, that being the Somnium Files. The game in question I did for my channel when it came out mid last year was No Sleep for Kaname, and it came out because I played the first game, played the second game, and by the time that the second game finished up, I had access to the third game because it came out on Switch, and I was happy to say I enjoyed it. It's unique because the original writer, Kotaro Uchikoshi, was doing the 100 line, and they had someone else take over for him, and what they were going for was a bit more of a pseudo spin-off, pseudo sequel, mini sequel thing, interstitial sequel. So not exactly a continuation of the second game and the events therein, but doing enough to introduce characters from those games and places and faces and stuff, but utilizing them in a way that is basically its own self-contained shorter story with different characters as the focus, but going back to Kaname himself as the main character, with Aiba, of course, as his AI ball and partner. So you're not focusing so much on Ryuki and Mizuki and whatnot, though they do exist in the game. They take a back seat. This goes back to Date, Aiba, and Iris kind of as the main focus. But they introduce characters here and there from the first game again. And the story itself takes itself way less seriously. There is darker stuff, but it never ever feels like they act on it like they do in the first two. And nothing of consequence tends to jump around. In fact, there's really no jumping around in stories and branching paths that happens. This is about half the length of the other two games, and that has pluses and minuses to its approach. I will say being able to kind of dive right back in and enjoy the characters in a less intense environment allows for more comedy, because these characters are funny and do funny things. But again, there is that sense that it is kind of lacking in other spots. I will say that there is a moment or two that does get some good stuff to it. I would say reintroducing Pewter and kind of tying up the loose end of, like, how did they find him? How did he get in the first game, get arrested, and then go around and basically be back no harm done in the second game? Well, they answer that question, and I think his story is interesting. Like, he gets his own Somnium, and having that character back and exploring more, because you've explored Date's character, you know what he's gonna do, so you don't have to really explore Date's character anymore. You don't really have to explore Aiba much. They are who they are. So finding ways to explore other characters is good. And they also add in some new characters for this story, and they end up being the focal point. So you kind of have Date doing his thing, Aiba doing his thing. Iris takes kind of the secondary lead because she ends up being kind of the main focus of an escape game. And being that this is the franchise that made 99, or the creators that made 999 and such, they bring that involved. They bring that to its own way into this franchise. So 999, Virtue's Last Reward, and Zero Time Dilemma were the first games that they made, and then they made this franchise. So those games were mostly done in first-person view. This one goes for a more, like, third-person view walking around simulation, and then doing first-person view to show you things and do things and talk through it. I did like that all of it was voice acted, and that's been a trend that this franchise has done, is full voice acting. I want to say the other games were, at least the later ones. And that does help for immersion's sake, especially considering this is more of a visual novel. Being able to control Iris and other characters and see them walking around and interacting with the environment while you're trying to solve these puzzles does add to the dynamic a bit more, because in the original games I was always feeling like, yeah, I'm a disembodied voice and I'm kind of just following along and I'm doing these puzzles and, you know, letting them do a thing. But, you know, it is nice to move around the environment fully 3D and see it in scope, because they're big enough. The areas are big enough. It's kind of like Somnium without the drawbacks of the timing, you know, because that's been my biggest issue with Somniums, has been, you know, time limits. So I'm glad that the recent games, you know, second one and this one, have went for story difficulty, where they've cut down the sheer amount of the time penalties. So yeah, I'm playing them more for story purposes and getting them done than anything else. The puzzles and the Somniums themselves are a mixed bag, but they also kind of still manage to throw in interesting ideas. One of the ideas, and this is more of a red herring than anything else, is the idea of this ancient civilization where they're coming to Earth and they're doing the thing, and it piques Iris's interest, because of course it does. So it turns out like she joins it because Mizuki asked her to, but then the designer of it mess with her and whatnot. The designer of this setup is Akemi, voiced by Jenny Yokobori. She is this lizard-like character that shows up, and you don't see her sometimes. You see her in, you know, TV screens and computer screens, and sometimes she'll show up in the escape games themselves somehow. It's weird. I like it. But the more you peel back, the less the conspiracy theory weirdness happens, and the more it's a bit more sinister and a bit more like everything kind of leads to a certain answer you can kind of pick up on the more you do it. If you saw me play through it, you know it. I'm keeping it spoiler free for those who hadn't, but suffice it to say, she's kind of the main villain of this piece, and she kidnaps Iris and forces her to do the escape game, and Iris doesn't really seem aware of it and the danger that's involved with it. And, you know, even Akemi doesn't really get violent until the end, because she's playing it for laughs and laughs and laughs, and then all of a sudden she becomes very, very violent. But there's more to her than meets the eye. And the story is less about kidnapping Iris and more about Hina Skiono, who was Pewter's replacement and co-worker. She's voiced by Michelle Marie, and she's kind of a bouncy, mousy girl, and she loves escape games, and, you know, they pal around with Date and Aiba a bit. Date gets a little bit of a creeper vibe, but, you know, that's Date. It's not a shock, but again, he still has Hitomi, so it's like he doesn't act on it too much, and thank God, because that would be weird, you know. But Hina is just a bit of a scatterbrain weirdo who just loves escape games, so she gets involved. I like that for Somniums, and specifically for escape games, when you need advice or when you need hints or when you're needing like lore dumps for these things, the voice acting helps, and everybody's seeing it on the monitors and they're helping you. You know, Aiba's giving you hints, Hina's giving you hints, even the boss sometimes throws in little quips and shit just for fun, you know. So everybody seems they're involved. I think that this is to help people kind of get answers to puzzles, and kind of in the same way like Phoenix Wright or Danganronpa or Raincode would like give you hints of, oh, you better do that thing, and, you know, nudge you in that direction. If you're not really into being told what to do, these puzzles may not be for you. But again, I was playing on the easiest difficulty, so that might have been innately designed into that difficulty. So I was following a guide, so again, bear that in mind. I don't know how difficult these tests and these quizzes and these puzzles are in context, but I felt that they were suitable enough and they were varied enough. Some of them had Japanese mythology and stuff involved. Some of them had conspiracy theories involved. Some of them were about, different names and places. One was about a space invasion. One was about an observatory. One was being stuck in the middle of a train station. Actually, 2 or 3 of them were about being in a train station. And you kind of slowly unravel things. And again, this follows in the sense that you kind of know where they're leading once the veil's been lifted. So nothing should really come as a shock to you in the game. But you do have to remember that this was developed as a spin-off, so taking it in a bit of an easier direction or a less intense direction or a comedic direction is not really a bad thing, because this franchise has been silly and is willing to be silly and dorky and funny. And, all you have to do is talk to boss for 5 seconds and stare at the items and have her mention the dialogue for 5 seconds, then or all the the back talk that Aiba and Date give each other. It's not meant to be taken as this gritty crime novel, whatever, only in certain spots. So playing it safer and going for a little bit of a minimalist approach, a bite-sized game. I kind of wish it was a little cheaper in that sense, but what can you do? I still kind of enjoyed it. I will say, the one thing that did bug me, and I don't know if it bugged anybody else, was Iris being in a bunny outfit for the entire game. They never really do explain it, other than she wakes up and she's in the outfit. I'm guessing it's for the viewer's entertainment, and I'm like, you have access to her old school outfit. You don't need this. And near the end of the game, when they give her the dance number, she's still in the outfit, and I'm like, could you not have given her a bit better clothing to wear? It just, I know she's meant for a gag and it's a weird thing, but it's such a weird thing. I'm not saying it's some deal breaker, but it is kind of strange that she's the main character in most of these escape games and she's running around in this dorky bunny costume that's totally revealing and everything. But getting back to the benefits, I will mention that in the escape games, the amount of people allowed to participate was nice. It wasn't just Iris. They gave you a chance to do Iris and Ota, and Ota was also still creeping on Iris, which is he stops it in the second game, so again you remember that he's the fucking weirdo guy from the first, the weirdo perv, closet perv Twitter guy, and you're just like, oh God, So it's not nice. MoMA's here too, and he does the creeping on Iris thing too, but again, for a gag. But being able to go to those and then switching to, Date is the character in this one, or you're doing 2 or 3 different characters and you're switching them. That's a cool idea, to allow them to do different spots. Date, Ota, and MoMA get their one, and then eventually it's just Date himself with Aiba's help in the final one. And being allowed to do different variations on that formula does change it. I know that's how the original games were. You did separate paths with separate characters. But given that this cast is varied, but still Date heavy and Iris heavy, you would have expected they would have just stuck with those two. They took the time to let all the other people have their moments. So even though they were side characters, they still had some agency in the game and the result. So it builds that camaraderie of that, they actually feel like people that know each other or actual friends. It doesn't feel like they're just restarting from zero. So they're involved in this case. They do a thing for this side story, even though it's based on Hina and Akemi and what's going on with them. So even if some people don't really get a lot of focus, Mizuki, for example, you're also like balancing the books. You're saying, yeah, Date's the main character, but we still have time to show you these 5 or 6 other people that are lived in characters with this franchise. So on the whole, I still think for a shorter experience, it's not amazing. It's not going to win any awards storytelling-wise or plot twist-wise, and it's not nearly as dark as the first 2. But it's a good continuation, and I think it's a solid jumping-off point if they don't want to do like a full-on sequel. Because that Date's a detective, you can kind of do... Like, if you wanted to, you could go back to Mizuki as the main character, or Ryuki as the main character, or you could splice it in this sort of stuff and just be like, kind of like Ace, where you just jump around their life. And, you go back to before, maybe not before this, but be like, oh, they're in this case now. They're doing this thing, because how many cases has Date solved? How many cases has Mizuki solved in a time jump? There's cool things you can do with these characters, and there's no way to really run out of motivation unless you just don't want to do the franchise anymore. So you could conceivably just keep doing sequels like this if you wanted, or jump around at any point. That's the benefit of having a detective and a setup where you're just like, if you come up with, Somnium ideas and now escape game ideas, you could do this for perpetuity if you wanted, and it not feel like a rehash. So, would I recommend No Sleep for Kaname Date? Yes, I would. Obviously from a sequel perspective, but from its own design. It builds upon what came before without feeling like a replacement for the second game. They're giving you something different while still kind of blending the first 2 games together. And that's a good way to keep the franchise going. So I really enjoyed it. But that will do for today. Nice kind of shorter talking game today. Next up is Maquia, When the Promised Flower Blooms. I'm going to have to read up on that one. I remember loving the hell out of that, so I'm going to have to prep for that one. Final Fantasy VI. Speaking of games I don't need prep for, I played that so many freaking times I could talk about it in my sleep. Apothecary Diaries with Leigh. We'll get to that at some point. I don't have to do it for another month or so. Ys Origin. I will beat it in a week, I think, so I'll have plenty to talk about with it. And then going before Mega May is Be the Beginning. I recently rewatched that show, and I do like it. I remember liking it when I first saw it, at least the first season. I watched part of the second season, so I know enough about it. It's a little shorter. But as on a whole, I did enjoy watching it. It's weird. It can be sometimes. But I did enjoy it. So I get to talk about that going into April. But it's still early February, so I will leave it here, and I will see you next time. Citizen Strife, signing off.